I'm Ava.
And I'm Issa. We're writers and fans.
This is Unpacking the Plot. Today we're going to be talking about Bridgerton.
You
This
say
is
it like it's a celebration.
it is a celebration. Bridgerton is a romance novel put on the screen. It's meant to have happy feelings. So this was a show and some books that I really enjoyed, and I recommended that Issa should check them out. And here we are after she decided to watch the show. So we're all caught up. So we're going to be talking about seasons 1 through 3, as well as Queen Charlotte, the prequel series. And I'm going to relate it back a little bit to the books as well. So there will be spoilers for anybody who hasn't seen or read. Be aware.
I finally hopped on the Bridgerton train after all these years of hearing about it on Netflix. And you know what the craziest part is? No one talked about all the fun, quirky, interesting things about this show. When you go online, I was like, oh, that show is that one period drama about sex.
Yep, that did have that reputation, and season 1 lived up to that reputation. They kind of toned it down in a good way for the following seasons. I think season 1, it was almost like they were just trying to go for shock value. I think one of the opening scenes was Anthony and Sienna like going nuts.
Yeah, I completely forgot about that scene. Sometimes it pops in my brain and when I think about Bridgerton and I can't even remember who those people are. I was like, why are we watching this? What is happening?
Yeah, it was very abrupt. Leading into season 1, what did you think?
Season one, I enjoyed season one. I think it is one of the stronger storylines of all the Bridgerton seasons.
I think season 1 was the closest one to the actual book story. I could be wrong there because it's been a while since I have read the first book. But season 1 was great. I really loved Queen Charlotte personally. I think that one was my favorite
Me too.
plotline wise, which is funny because that one's not even based on a book. Queen Charlotte isn't even really a character in the books at all. She's mentioned, but she doesn't show up. We're going to be breaking down Bridgerton, talking about the characters that we love. And the first character up to bat is Simon, the Duke of Hastings. So what did you think about Simon and, his struggles learning about like his childhood and what that was like and his adamance about not giving in to his father's desires to continue the Hastings bloodline, or the Basset bloodline, I should say, and wanting the title of Duke of Hastings to die with him?
I empathize with him because he struggles as a child. He is the first and only son of his father, and he is supposed to uphold this legacy, but does not live up to his father's standards because,
He has a speech impediment.
yes, so his father basically shuns him and acts like he doesn't exist. And so it was really easy to feel sympathy for a character like that. For me, it wasn't necessarily something that made me like him, but it was something that made me feel that I could connect in a motivation sense because he had all the reason to not like his father and be like, no, I'm not going to continue your bloodline.
It's interesting to me to see in Queen Charlotte, you have the scene where his father and his mother show up at Lady Danbury's house to see what's going to happen to the title once Lord Danbury passes away, if it's going to get passed on to her son, or if they're going to lose the title, and kind of put that in perspective with Simon's father in season 1, how he himself had been the first to have that title. I think it's just a really interesting layer to add on to the backstory of Simon's childhood.
It makes the world feel fuller.
In the book, you're immediately aware of Simon's attraction to Daphne, whereas the show, I feel like it doesn't convey that as well.
In the show, I found it very believable that he fell for her as soon as he did, and how we see that because of how women have been in Simon's life. Because his mother died when she gave birth to him. And so he has this almost idealized view of her in his mind. And then his father shuns him, and Lady Danbury comes and decides to care for him. She was a friend of his mother's, and she's like, I'm going to teach you how to read, and I'm going to educate you, and I'm going to teach you to basically be a decent person because your father should be here doing this, and he's not. So when we go to the present day, when we leave those flashbacks of him as a child, and he's with Daphne, I can really believe how he falls for her because he already has this base of idealized women in his mind. And then, of course, he actually gets to know Daphne. So,
In the book, it's a funny meet cute. Neither one of them knew who the other one was. And when she finds out, she's like, my mother told me to stay away from you. And he was like, oh, because her mother knew of his reputation, which her mother changes her tune pretty quickly because, he is the Duke of Hastings.
And a duke, that's higher ranking than the Bridgertons. They're like Viscount
Yeah,
something.
I believe the Duke is the next level after the king.
Yes.
At
My
least it's
only gripe with Simon and his arc was towards the end. And it felt like he got whacked with the character development hammer in those last couple of episodes because I could see him going that arc. Because we're presented with, I'm not gonna have kids, and then at the end, it's clear we're gonna get his arc of being, oh no, actually, I do want to have a family and a life. I shouldn't hold this grudge. But it felt forced upon him.
quite literally.
I didn't mean to do that. And on the other hand, we have Daphne, who is from a much more loving family. She is the queen's favorite of all the people who are presented or whatever. She's the diamond of the season.
That is so not in the book at all. Daphne's actually been out for 3 seasons, and she describes herself as being friends with men. So anybody that she would be interested in marrying immediately disregards her because they're like, oh, that's Daphne. She's one of the boys. When she meets Simon, she keeps talking about how she understands men so well because she grew up with so many brothers. She's like, in my experience with men. And like in his head, he's like, in your experience with men.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah.
He's like, oh, I didn't know Anthony's sister was like this.
Another interesting change they make is actually Anthony is aware of what Simon and Daphne are doing in the books.
The fake dating.
He knows about it.
Daphne first really learns about sex when she and Simon finally get married. That was a little bit forced because Anthony sees them kissing and he's like, oh no, yeah, we have to marry my sister or we have to duel.
That happens in the book too.
But he knew they were fake. Okay.
He knew they were fake dating, but they shouldn't have been kissing.
See, this is my thing with fictional past eras that are also a little fantastical because they go against the norm a little bit. It's not, oh, this is set in Regency London. It's set in Regency London with all these little tweaks that make me think, why can't we add this and that tweak?
Which tweaks are you talking about?
The whole unification of the races.
Yeah, that's unique to the show. And I am glad that they made that change. It makes it a more interesting storyline with trying to not just focus it on one race and one sexuality and kind of incorporating more diverse characters into the universe, but also still trying to keep true to their storylines for the time period they're in while still ringing true with the people who are watching it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll give it some leeway now. I was being too harsh. One of my things, my gripes, is when Daphne says that she is fine with just having Simon. She's like, you're all I need. We don't need to have kids. And then she finds out how babies work. And then how do I put this in a nice way?
She sexually assaults him.
Yeah, okay, there's no nice way. She sexually assaults him. And then she has this whole righteous moment about it. And fair, he was keeping it to himself.
But it wasn't him who should have disclosed that to her. Could he have chosen his words better and say that he didn't want kids instead of not being able to have kids? Maybe.
Mhm.
But really, her mother should have explained it to her.
Her mother has a talk with her about how that works. And her mom's like, oh, well, when you're in love. Daphne is so rightfully pissed at her
Yeah.
after that.
I will say the scene between Daphne and Simon is worse in the book than it is on the TV show. I blocked it out a little bit, but I know that it's worse.
And these
They
things.
could have done something else with that without having to resort to sexual assault. They could have had her accidentally get pregnant because we all know that Simon's method of birth control is not 100% effective.
Oh, yeah. Honestly, I would have liked that. That would have been an interesting moment for Simon to be like, oh, it can't escape me. There's a chance I could have an heir when I don't want one.
If that was any other time period, it would be like divorce.
It's just 2 episodes left, and I'm like, how do we fix this? And that's how I feel every single season with Bridgerton.
Yeah, they do try to do a lot in the last 2 episodes, and it's a little bit too much.
Yeah, by the end of season 3, I was like, everyone's very forgiving in this universe.
On to Anthony. We've spoken about him and his character arc a little bit. I do feel like Anthony in season 1 kind of conflicts with Anthony in season two in terms of, his whole relationship with Sienna. And I don't know if I read the room wrong, but it kind of seemed like he was in love with her. And
I got the impression he was in love with this idealized version of her.
like
Hmm.
what you think is love until you really feel love. And what's interesting is that Anthony's trauma in the book and also in season two has always been that he doesn't want to feel love because he doesn't want to leave somebody with the pain that his mother went through. In the book, he foresees himself dying very young, the same way his father did.
And in season one, his whole relationship with Sienna, the opera singer who he's kind of wanting to be this lady and be in society that she is not a part of and not interested in being a part of. He has this whole arc with her. And then by the end of it in season one, he's like, oh, never mind, I'm not gonna fall in love. And then in season two, his whole reason for not wanting to be in love is the whole thing about dying, like his dad and hurting whoever he's married to. And I was like, what was the point of his arc in season one then?
I do find it a strange change for how they portray Anthony.
We see in the first season how he is pretty controlling of Daphne and what suitors she gets and things like that. How do you feel about how Anthony's a bit close-minded when it comes to women and their autonomy? And then in the second season, he still kind of has that, but he's confronted with it a lot more.
He's a lot less controlling of Daphne in the book. He even openly says to Simon, I've allowed her to decline all four marriage proposals.
Hmm.
And like that is in itself uncommon.
Anthony has this burden, this responsibility of being the Viscount of the Bridgertons. And I like how that's introduced in the first season because his mom basically says, you can't keep running around with Sienna. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You need to put your foot down and do things. And I like how that sets off his whole arc. And then that, I think, transitions very well into his whole flashback and backstory in the second season. It's just the part where he falls out of love in the first season that confuses me.
Right. It's him going back to her and like begging for her attention. And that makes you kind of like, what is going on in his head? But because of this earlier trauma with his father, it almost conflicts with that because you see that as being presented first. Then how did this storyline fit into that trauma? And now why is the trauma coming back around to the other side of this relationship?
Yeah, I felt like Anthony was getting a soft reboot.
Yeah, in season two, they portray Anthony as always putting the family first and that he's always been like that. But then in season one, they kind of tell him that he needs to put the family first. So I feel like it just conflicts so much.
And then Anthony decides to really look out for the family by trying to find a wife who he thinks will be the next best Viscountess for the Bridgertons without any love attachment, nothing, just she needs to be this well-rounded person or whatever. And that's how we're introduced to Edwina Sharma, who, comes into town from India to find a husband for Edwina. And she comes with her mom and her half-sister Kate. I honestly felt like Edwina was kind of like a plot device for most of the season.
Yeah, I don't really like the way they handled that whole thing in season two. The way that they made it so that Edwina and Kate's relationship had that tension and falling out. It just felt drawn out for no real reason other than to add drama. And drama's great for a TV show, but have drama for a reason, not just for the sake of drama.
The whole time I worried that she was just a pawn and a plot device until she gets really, 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 really far with Anthony and they're literally at the altar. And she's the one who makes the ultimate choice and runs off, breaks the marriage, all that.
That is actually one of the things that makes me reconsider the fact that this is one of the only Bridgerton books that I have not read, is that supposedly in the book it ends way sooner and there's none of this love triangle dynamic. They do court, but it's briefly, and then they go their separate ways when they realize that they're not well matched.
I really enjoyed season two, and I think it's because I like Kate. And the funniest thing, how they kept bringing up age 6 and 20, an old maid now.
I know.
And I'm over here just watching, trying to find the wrinkles.
She's a spinster.
I made it. But you know, Kate seems like one of those characters that I tend to be really drawn to for female characters. Just the ones that are, they clearly have some flaws, but are pretty determined and self-assured. So I think that's why I felt drawn to season two. And also Anthony, even though the show is called Bridgerton, he felt like a love interest in his season. I
Yeah,
think.
it felt more like Kate's season
Yes.
than
And she's
Anthony's
not
season.
Bridgerton.
Yeah, I really liked Kate too. She's very strong, very opinionated, but it's hard for me in talking about things that characters do that is hard to move past. It's hard for me to move past the fact that while she's saying that she doesn't think that the Viscount is right for Edwina, she should have said something early on, like that she was attracted to him too, or like anything. Like
Yeah.
all she would have had to say when Edwina was talking about him, she'd be like, he is quite attractive for it to like start putting something in Edwina's brain that, maybe Kate has something there instead of like portraying this whole, I hate him, he's not good for you, stay away from him, which obviously didn't work. You can see that she wants what's best for her sister, and she was going to stand aside and let her sister have that happiness, but is it really happiness if the person you're marrying has feelings for your sister and your sister has feelings for them?
Yeah, and that's something Anthony kept bringing up to Kate, being like, I will not be able to stop thinking about you if I get with your sister. But then Anthony, of course, is the one who proposes. So it's like, okay. And
That was too far for me. That was when it should have ended. That moment when they left and Edwina was like, I must have done something wrong. He didn't propose. Even if they wanted to drag it out further than it was in the book and make that a point, it should have ended there.
I do understand Kate's struggle, though, how she making that decision and being like, okay, well, Anthony would be good for my sister. He could provide for her. My sister would have a good standing in society. This would be a good thing. But, the feelings are very strong and they get in the way. However, we get that all really brought to light when Kate has a talk with Edwina's mother, Mary, about how she felt that love was owed and that she needed to compensate for the love that was given to her. She needed to give as much as she could to Edwina. She taught her everything she knew. She wanted Edwina to have the best suitors. And Kate just planned to go back to India and be a governess. Like she was not planning to have any sort of romance for herself. And she was going to give that life to her sister because she felt like she owed her sister and her sister's mom this kindness because they took her in.
That is something that I absolutely loved when Edwina confronted Kate and she was like, you say you want what's best for me, but what you're doing is giving me everything that you want.
Yeah.
I do wish that they had shown Edwina have a little bit more, like court somebody else and find somebody else to marry, but with the whole jilted wedding thing, they couldn't really go into that more. I mean, they mention it briefly in season 3 that she got married, but it doesn't really show anything of it. And it, like you said, it makes her more of a plot device than a character itself.
Yeah, I do like that the queen tried setting her up with the prince at the very end because, that didn't work with Daphne and the prince. And I remember being really excited when the queen said that because, like, oh, they would be so good together. How did you feel about Anthony and Kate's little tryst by that tree?
I really like Anthony and Kate's relationship. I love a good enemies to lovers, and that's kind of
Ah,
what they are.
don't say enemies to lovers.
Why?
They are begrudging. I have a thing about this,
Oh,
okay? If they don't want to kill each other, they are not enemies.
yeah. They're hate
Oh,
to love.
enemies. Hate to love. That's fine, you know? Enemies is a whole other thing.
I do like that, but it just feels like every single season of Bridgerton we have the same, oh, I compromised this lady and now I need to marry her. And that's not necessarily the reason that Anthony's going to marry Kate, but
Mhm.
he loves her, he wants to marry her, but at the same time it's like you've done this last season and this season, and we have a little taste of it in season 3 too.
And what's crazy too is that because of how they treat that same, oh, there's a scandal, we have to get married, how they treat that in season three, it almost cheapens how they spin it on its head in season two.
Mhm.
Because in season two, Kate's like, oh, he only wants to marry me, he wants to propose to me because we had sex by a tree. I don't know why I'm adding that qualifier. But the truth is that Anthony actually just genuinely wants to marry her. And then in season three, it's like, boom.
we kind of have to get married because it's like, okay, well, because we had that in season one already.
Yeah, just needs something different, which hopefully season 4 will give us.
Yes, and as happy as an ending we get with Anthony and Kate, which is crazy. Like, it's because Kate has that injury. She gets injured, and then everyone forgives her because they think she might not wake up from her coma, which I figured that she and her sister would reconciliate, but it just sped up the timeline so that Edwina could be like, my sister might die, I need to forgive her, and Anthony to be like, I really need to marry her even more.
Well, he was ready to propose to her before the accident,
Yes.
but I do think that it sped up Edwina's feelings,
Yeah, just ensuring that the show had a happy ending.
which is another thing. It's interesting that they tie it together. Like they seem to try to tie up all the plot lines of a season at the end of a season,
Mhm.
which I get it. You're based off of books that are interconnected standalone books. You don't have to necessarily read them in order. But with the TV show, they have all these side plots, and it sometimes feels like the side plots are too rushed to really get the full effect that you would want to get because they're trying to tie up the whole side plot in one season. When
I
they
feel like
could
we get that
really
a lot in season three.
I mean, even season 2 into season 3, I feel like you could extend some of the side plots and make it a more cohesive story. Like Benedict is such a great example of that. He is the reason that I decided to start reading the books because I wanted to read his book,
Mhm.
which is still one of my favorite books. I'm extremely excited for season 4, which should be his season.
Yes, we are just off the announcement.
Yes, Netflix's announcement. Which I will say, there's some things about Benedict's book that I don't love. Don't get me wrong, it's not perfect. But one thing that I really love is that Benedict's love interest is other.
Are you saying that she's not part of the polite society?
I am, in fact. And I'm so for it. With Benedict, we have a different situation and a different relationship and different barriers.
That excites me too because I like that of all the characters, 'cause since he's always so he's very laid back. He just kind of does whatever he wants because that's brought up in the first couple seasons of Anthony being like, "You're lucky you're not the eldest. I have to deal with all this Viscount bullshit, and you can just laze around and go to art school and do whatever you want." I'm excited for him in season four because knowing that he's the one who's confronted with this person that I love is not a part of polite society, that he needs to make that stand, that's exciting. I'm excited for that.
Yeah. But like I said, with the first 3 seasons, we're getting I want you, but I can't have you because of self-imposed rules and guidelines that I made myself. Nobody else would see it as me not being able to be in a relationship with you. I'm just torturing myself.
It's like all the previous stuff we get is an internal conflict, and with Benedict, we get this external conflict.
Yes, and I'm really excited for it.
Can I say something really quick?
Yeah.
That lady that he sleeps with in season three, Tilly, she did not look like she belonged in the Regency era at all, and it bugged me every time we saw her. It just threw me out so much every time we went to their scenes.
That was another thing that was rushed. I feel like they could have introduced Tilly in season 2 and then introduced Benedict and Tilly's.
Her paramour.
I think they could have introduced that like maybe at the beginning of season 3 because that felt really rushed to me. And I feel like they could have given that a little bit more time to grow.
Yeah, I didn't feel like it was important the entire season until they told us in the last episode, I think, where Tilly's like, actually, I want to just be with you and we can date. And Benedict's like, ah, no.
I think that that is an interesting point for his character and his development because in season 1 you see him talking with the guy from art school about how he feels the guy from art school feels loving a man and not being able to be with him. And then, Benedict not really understanding. And then he has that character development into season 3 where he himself engages in that type of a relationship. One thing I really like in talking about Benedict and him living outside society is his support of Eloise and how Eloise herself struggles to fit within the bounds of society and how he kind of is her sounding board for that and he feels like her safe space.
So, on Eloise, the fifth Bridgerton sibling, what are your opinions when you first see her?
I like her. I think she's a good comedic relief character and to kind of showcase the limitations of the time period. And,
Mhm.
she truly struggles with her identity and her place in the world.
I really vibe with everything she says, but at the same time, she comes off very young, bratty teenager, very defiant, and her family doesn't take it as serious as she does.
Her struggle is privileged defiance.
Hmm.
She's been privileged to be able to be as educated as she is, to be able to read the books that she wants to read. Like a lot of families at that time would not have allowed that for their daughters. But I do love the break in season 2 when she starts hunting down Lady Whistledown even more and she meets Theo. I really loved that for her character. I
Hmm.
loved that development, and he was somebody outside the traditional bounds of society, and that to me felt really right for her at that time.
I really enjoyed her having someone she could bounce her ideas off because with Benedict and Penelope, they both allow her to express herself and they listen. And the moment with Theo, I felt like she was able to actually really trade those thoughts that she had in her mind. And we got to, as the audience, were able to see even more just how serious she was about the way she felt. And it was, like you said, an example of how privileged she was because Theo is a completely different class.
And I think he really challenges her education and what she knows of the world. And he finally gives her what she's looking for in terms of expanding that knowledge and kind of seeing things from a different perspective and getting to experience life outside of these parties and events that she's forced to go to with her family and society.
And it's interesting how we go from her having that wake up call with Theo to in season 3, she does decide to blend in more with society. She still believes everything she does. She's just kind of mellowed out a bit.
Yeah, I feel like she felt a deep sense of betrayal from just about everybody she cared about. I mean, she has the betrayal from Penelope at the
Mhm.
end of season 2, which then kind of fed into the betrayal of Theo, how they kind of left that friendship that was starting to feel like more. And she just kind of felt betrayed by everybody. So she kind of tucked her tail feathers and she seems to have made herself smaller. I think a really good part is when Colin comes back and he brings her this book that he thinks she'll really like, and she doesn't want anything to do with it because it almost seems like she's afraid of her old rebellious streak.
Yeah, and I feel like that really shows when she decides to befriend Cressida, who has been out since Daphne's been out. Cressida is a good example of a character that's definitely trying to fit into society. She's trying to get her husband, all that kind of stuff. So it was crazy to see that contrasted with Eloise, someone who had completely different mindsets in comparison.
Her character arc was interesting. I'd be curious to see how she plays into later seasons and, if she finally does make her match. But it was kind of cruel of Daphne to go after the prince when he was courting Cressida. And also, why didn't he go back to Cressida?
Yeah, I thought that was really weird. I think he was just like, you know what? I'm gonna give up. I'm tired.
Yeah, that was bizarre to me. It was like, she's still there, her villain origin story.
Honestly. And then we have Penelope Featherington, who is kind of overshadowing the entire 3 seasons of Bridgerton because she's Lady Whistledown, which we mentioned, the gossip columnist. And I don't know about you, but at the end of that first season, when it was revealed that Penelope was Whistledown, it felt fake.
It's not revealed until her book.
Oh, that's way more interesting.
It is, but at the same time, you can keep a lot more under wraps in a book than you can on a TV show. But that whole conflict with Eloise doesn't happen in the books with her as Lady Whistledown. Colin
Mhm.
is the first one to find out, not Eloise.
I don't know about you, but I found it a little strange at first how much Penelope ragged on her own family in the gossip column. Like, yes, it made sense that as Lady Whistledown, she would do that because she had the anonymity and she was feeling very strongly towards the way her parents treated her. So it is like believable, but I like the moments where we get into the mindset of this young girl who wrote all those things. She's a good writer. She's anonymous. She is also young and emotional. So she's going to be putting all her frustrations in this paper and not really care that much about who it hurts.
I think part of it was her kind of acting out, and I think she was also trying to sway her mother's mind on like the colors, because one thing that she talks about a lot is the colors of the dresses that the Featherington girls wear. And the thing that I love about her makeover in season 3 is that it's her decision, especially with the way that they had Colin giving her charm lessons.
Hmm. I felt like this latest season, the season 3 of Bridgerton, I felt like Penelope was basically our main character and she was forgiven way too easily.
Well, I think part of that too is that they broke too much. So in the book, he's really just getting over his jealousy. He went into it knowing who she was. He wanted her to stop. She didn't want to stop. That was some conflict. And I mean, that would be an easier bridge to climb over. But when you get to this season where she lied to him, then they slept together, he proposed to her, and then he found out. And not just her lying to him about this career that she has, but the things that she wrote about his family.
I mean, she talked about Eloise, and, that led to the immense betrayal that Eloise felt when she found out she was Whistledown. And so Colin had that, where she literally talked bad about his sister and Marina, who he was trying to court in the first season, a woman who's Penelope's distant kind of cousin.
Or even what she wrote about Colin himself. Not that it was that bad what she wrote about Colin. I mean, she called him fake pretty much, didn't she?
Mm-hmm.
And he felt a certain way about Lady Whistledown all throughout the season. So then to find out the woman that he was about to spend the rest of his life with was in fact that person, after he felt as though he could make no other decision because, again, in the world of Bridgerton, apparently the leads will only marry a woman if they compromise her.
Yeah, that's been a trend. And it's speaking of Colin, I don't know about you, but in the first episode of season 3, when we're introduced to him, we know it's his season and he's gonna be with Penelope and all that. He felt a little icky personally, because the first 2 seasons, he's like a sweet little nub. Like, even like, for example, with Marina, it's revealed that she was pregnant and trying to basically baby trap him and all that through the Whistledown column. And he's like, I would have married you if you had just told me that you were pregnant. Like, I would have done it anyway. He was giving all these vibes of being a very sweet guy. And then the very beginning of season 3, not that he's in a sweet person, just he was very much womanizing and things like that. And I was just like, oh, okay.
Don't you think, after hearing that point that you just made, that it makes Penelope's betrayal in season 3 even worse? The fact that Marina was about to trap him into marriage because she was pregnant with somebody else's child. And then Penelope goes and does the same thing. She's going to marry him without telling him she's Lady Whistledown.
Yeah. There are a lot of things about Colin, like now that you bring that up, that even within that season, I didn't click. Like the thing about when he brings up, oh, you're a better writer than me, and you've been lying to me about being this writer this whole time, and you've been praising me about my skills. And then what you said just now, that sucks even more for him.
That, to me, I didn't like that change, in that he didn't know before the proposal and before they were intimate. It felt icky, especially after his history with Marina. And I understand the reluctance to do so because this is all she's ever wanted and she doesn't want to burst the bubble. But at some point, the bubble's going to be burst. Colin's always been somebody who's very, very sensitive. He cares what other people think. He seems to always be trying to entertain people with his stories, and he, falls flat and people aren't very interested in him. And he's just the third Bridgerton brother. And then Penelope was always his friend. She cared about him. She cared about what he had to say. And then at the end of season 2, she overhears him having this conversation with a group of gentlemen where they're teasing him about dancing with her and asking if he's courting her. And he says something along the lines of, I would never court Penelope Featherington, which, she hears, and that hurts because she's not only his friend, she loves him and she's loved him for years. I really loved the way that scene played out in the book so much more. She walks down the stairs, leaving the house after spending the day with Eloise, and overhears the same conversation, but this time it's between Anthony, Benedict, and Colin. And, it goes pretty much the same, but instead of sulking away in the shadows and not confronting him about it until the following season, she's just like, I never asked you to marry me.
From what you tell me about the books, it feels like Penelope was much more self-assured, and then in the show, she's very, I mean, not that it's a bad thing, very emotional teenager kind of vibes the whole time.
Well, what also you have to realize about the book is she's a lot older in the book. She's not a teenager. She doesn't really come to the main story until book 5, which takes place 10 years after the events of the first few seasons. Going back to the TV show and her overhearing that, it really changes her perspective on their relationship. And when Colin writes her that summer when he's off traveling, she's not responding. And, it doesn't come right out and say it, but in the way that Colin completely changes who he is, I think that that is a direct reflection of losing that one person who would always listen to you. He feels like he's just not enough. Everybody seems to love him with this new personality.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you make about Colin because I didn't quite catch that at first, even though it is kind of obvious, but something about how they handled Colin just didn't make it click for me. And speaking of things in season 3 in general, how did you feel about Francesca Bridgerton being spotlighted that season?
I do like that they combined it because Francesca's book is about a second love and it's not meant to be about her first marriage. But I don't like how when they introduced who became Michaela, because they did gender bend the character, at the end of the season, Francesca was immediately taken with her because I think that that pulls away from Francesca's relationship with John a little bit. Like, I could understand there being attraction immediately, but the way that it was portrayed that as soon as Francesca sees Michaela, she gets butterflies, and which is great, except she literally just married her cousin. So I'm curious to see how they're going to twist that.
I feel the exact same way on all fronts, especially because we spend all this time with Francesca and John kind of falling for each other. And it's this very quiet, I enjoy silence with you. I can just be with you and not make it this big dramatic thing like the other romances we have had in Bridgerton. And her mom, Violet, is over here like, why aren't you being all dramatic? Like, love is supposed to be this crazy, big, wild thing. And Francesca's like, no, it could just be this quiet, simple thing, and the feelings are still strong as ever. And I really like that message. And then she meets his cousin, Michaela, and there goes Francesca's little quiet, simple romance and Violet's whole arc. Well, not her whole arc, because she has the whole thing with Lady Danbury's brother, but also just this whole thing of, oh, love doesn't need to be this huge epic thing. My daughter can have this quiet thing and it can be just as real and solid as all the other loves I've seen, including the one I had with my late husband. So there goes 2 arcs. What was that for?
Yeah, it just felt very belittling of the relationship that Francesca and John had built.
And our time. I was watching all of that.
In the books, they have a happy marriage. John was so sweet and he really took to understanding Francesca and what she needed. And he went out and he had that music made specifically for her, the way that it was playing in her mind. And then it feels like now they're chalking him up to be an obstacle instead of her freedom.
Initially, when Francesca is brought out into the season and all that, I was thinking that she could possibly be more attracted to women, even though she was like, no, I do want to get married. But you could tell the disinterest she had until she was able to just be quiet and just exist with John. And then it was like, oh no, she's not into men. It's like, oh, where are we going? What are we doing?
It's an interesting change. And I mean, I have no problem seeing that through. I feel bad for John a little bit.
Yeah. We kind of get this second love story with her mom, with Violet Bridgerton. Do you think maybe they're switching that around on purpose? Like maybe Francesca's story could be a story of infidelity and Violet is the one who gets a second chance at love from a dead husband?
It could be. You see her start to talk about wanting to find something again in Queen Charlotte. I almost feel like they should have just kept it in with Bridgerton, like almost made it season 3.
I kind of like that Queen Charlotte is a prequel series because it's just so good. Leave it alone.
It's an amazing show. Queen Charlotte is a character, but she is a character that has power in Bridgerton, but her personal life isn't a huge plot line in Bridgerton. So that in and of itself makes an amazing prequel. But Lady Danbury and Violet's storyline makes it so it matters the order in which you watch the show. And if you're just watching Bridgerton and you do season 1, season 2, season 3, you miss a lot of information that happens between those 2 characters in that prequel series. If you watch Queen Charlotte first before you watch season 1, then that's not going to fit.
You basically got to watch them in order of release.
All in season 2, it's all about the dad. Violet's talking about this great love, and then all of a sudden in season 3, she's kind of shopping around.
Yeah.
That widow.
Yeah.
Whereas it's explained in Queen Charlotte and kind of her coming to that realization and going through all those emotions and realizing that she wants to feel something again. She wants to have romance again. And I do think that it's really interesting that the most free a woman can be in that society is by being a widow.
I mean, Lady Danbury, the second she was widowed, she was out. She was not into getting married again.
With who again?
I mean, didn't Queen Charlotte's brother propose to her?
Yes, but she didn't want to get married again.
Yeah,
No.
because she had such a traumatic marriage in the first place.
She was 3 when she was betrothed
And
to,
basically groomed for the Lord Danbury.
yeah.
I loved her story. The main ones, of course, we get Queen Charlotte and King George for the flashbacks, of course. We also get Lady Danbury's backstory, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I was always wondering, like, wait, Lady Danbury and Bridgerton is very much pro-love. Why is she in this relationship that she hates? And she's clearly unhappy. And then we get the story of her having an affair with Lord Ledger, who is Violet's father. So that was kind of an interesting combination of like the characters and things like that, which feel is really smart. I think when things are happening, the best thing to do is to connect the characters as much as possible.
I still can't get over the fact that Violet sat there and told who she did not know at the time had previously been her late father's mistress that she wanted to get laid.
She's like, we're friends, right? Let me tell you, I would like to flourish my garden again.
Your garden? One thing that I think is really fun is that I think you get a really good glimpse of why the Bridgerton family is different than the rest of the families like that surround them. They're closer. Like Simon says in season 1, the children eat at the table with the adults. It's not traditional. And I think you see that from Lord Ledger. He encouraged Violet. And I mean, she kind of reminds me of Eloise, young Violet in Queen Charlotte, with her her mother sitting there spouting her racist views because you see the two sides of the Ton come together with Queen Charlotte and King George's marriage. I think it's really funny how she's just going off and then Violet cuts her off. And she's like, well, they are the same as us. The king gave us land and the king gave them land. And then she's like, Daddy always says a gentleman is based off his education, and they were educated in the same place as Daddy. And I think it's hilarious that her father's just sitting there like, yes, you're right. That's exactly true. And I love that he calls her beauty and then he calls her brains.
Yeah.
I loved their relationship.
And Lady Danbury is the first of Queen Charlotte's court because I guess it's just like, oh, we have to put all the people that aren't white with Queen Charlotte because, we're London and we're in this fictional world that is Bridgerton, but we're still racist.
Yeah, they had said that they gave titles in order to incorporate more racial equality into the Ton to make Queen Charlotte feel more comfortable. But it surprised me when it was all white women except for Lady Danbury.
Yeah, and you know what's weird? Queen Charlotte isn't really that comforted by it. She's just kind of like, okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
I did love Lady Danbury and Queen Charlotte's relationship.
Me too.
I don't know. I struggle with Queen Charlotte and King George's relationship because I know what happens.
I felt like their relationship was kind of the best representation of a relationship in more of a realistic sense, even though, yes, it is more dramatic because he has this condition and it is unlikely most people in real life are going to find someone with something like that or anything equivalent to that. But when you fall in love with someone, everyone's going to come with their own issues, whether mentally or physically, it's going to be something. And I really liked seeing them be so devoted to each other. Whereas in the other shows, there was this like intense dramatic love and everyone was hot, and like it's not that Queen Charlotte and King George weren't attractive, it's just they had problems and they weren't even completely good people either. Not that the other characters in the prior seasons were wholly good or anything like that. But we know Charlotte from the first couple seasons of Bridgerton already as the queen, and she's not really a likable character. She's really into the whistle down gossip and she's very controlling and she likes things her way. And then I was worried when we would go to Queen Charlotte that they would flash back to her when she was younger and be someone that was, oh, she was nicer back in the day. She was sweet. It's like, nope, she wasn't. She was just like she was now, except here are all these things that make you root for her. Like she's going to marry this king against her will. She doesn't want to be here. And she's also just a girl who has this stuff on her shoulders about combining the Ton and all the different races. And it's her duty to uphold that. And her husband has this condition. So I'm impressed that they were able to make us care about her and her character arc.
Plus, I thought it was interesting that her children are never mentioned in like the earlier seasons.
Sorrows and prayers.
I loved that so much. That was hilarious. Sorrows, Prayers.
I thought it was really cool how in the show Queen Charlotte, they were using Black artists as their little cover songs, things that they do. Like I noticed Beyonce, SZA, Alicia Keys. I thought that was cool
Yeah, I
considering the topic.
I don't really notice the music that much unless it's a song I know really well. Pushing back, one of the only musical covers I've noticed is in season 3 when Penelope walks down the stairs and that ABCDEFU cover comes on. That one clicked with me. I was immediately like, I know this song.
The ones in season 3 got me the most. One was Dynamite, which is BTS. Like that was very, very obvious and it felt almost out of place, even though they had their little string cover. And then the other one was Snow on the Beach by Taylor Swift. So I was like, oh, I know this one. But yeah.
Did you have anything else you wanted to say about George? I feel like
Oh,
we didn't really talk about George that much.
I really liked how we're introduced and he seems kind of like a total jerk because we see it all through Charlotte's perspective. And then I think it was like the 3rd episode where we see it in his perspective and it's revealed, oh, he's trying to protect her from himself. He needs to get his condition in check. And there's just this lack of communication. And then the whole thing kind of comes together when they're connecting literally and they decide to communicate and be together and work it out. And you know what? I really appreciated that show for the sex scenes felt like you needed to watch them. I mean, did they need to be the way they were? That's arguable, but I felt like if it weren't for seeing those, we wouldn't entirely connect with how they both were like, wait, I like spending time with you. Let's make this work and actually develop beyond this instead of the whole trying to have an heir thing.
Their relationship was interesting, and I do like how they did the pause, rewind, let's see it from his perspective. I got the like chills every time that doctor came on screen. You know, him trying to protect her and also kind of him spending his entire life thinking he's not good enough and how he has all this pressure on his shoulders to be the king and to do everything right and how he can't do anything right and he's constantly having these mental health breakdowns and constantly being sent to see the doctors and, you know, trying new experimental treatments that essentially amount to torture. And, you know, his mother condoning it because of what's best for England. And Charlotte's the first person to say, I don't care. He's not happy. He should be happy.
Yeah, I felt a lot in that show. I had a lot of feelings.
I liked it, but also I struggle with prequels because you already know it's going to be sad, and I don't like sad. I guess it was bittersweet, but I liked the end when she climbs under the bed. Come hide from the heavens with me.
Yes.
My absolute favorite thing about Queen Charlotte was Brimsley, who was the Queen's man, and I really loved his relationship with Reynolds.
The King's Man.
That too was bittersweet.
Yeah, because Reynolds wasn't around in the present anymore.
But why? I've seen multiple theories.
Do you have one you think it is?
I think he died.
Yeah, I think he died too.
Just the way that he is constantly looking out for Charlotte. And I love the way that he stands up to her brother and he was like, I mind my queen's business. And like, he's like, it's none of yours. He was like, I'm the one person who's not going to tell you what you can't do, but I will be the person to tell you how to best do what you want to do.
I like that he's her voice of reason in the present as well. And even in Bridgerton, you see them share little secret smiles and things like that.
Yeah, I really liked their friendship. I thought it was amazing. And I liked the parallels between Charlotte and George and Reynolds and Brimsley, and how as long as Charlotte and George are happy and living together, Reynolds and Brimsley get to be happy and living together. But when we see the disconnect between the two of them, it forces a disconnect between Brimsley and Reynolds too. And, you know, you kind of see that played out between them. I would love to see more of Brimsley. First, they need to get their Benedict season out.
Yes.
Because that is what I want.
Because that is what Ava wants. Ava gets what she wants first.
You know what? It was supposed to be season 3.
Okay.
They didn't even do Colin and Penelope justice.
Even if they'd done it more like the book, it was still rough because of all the extra side stuff in season 3.
The Mondrich, like season 1, he's a boxer. Season 2, he takes the money from Lord Featherington and opens the club. And then season 3, they get the title from her aunt that passed away. It's too much for one person's storyline, and it doesn't flow through all the seasons. It's very chopped up. Season 1, season 2, season 3. There's no flow, and it's just like, what should we do with this family this time?
Yeah, and it doesn't connect with the main story, so it doesn't matter.
Right. It was just very... Maybe if they had waited another season to have the Mondriches get a title, that would have made more sense. I think they needed to give it one more season of them kind of with the club because the club had just become successful. And, he was excited about that. And Simon's gone, and they kind of needed a way to keep the character relevant. And the Bridgertons didn't really spend that time in the gentleman's club. And I do think it would be a really interesting storyline to see somebody who was previously not titled coming into the Ton. But with the storylines that they had flowing in season 3 with Penelope and Colin, Francesca, and then you have Eloise and Penelope, and you have Benedict and Tilly. It was just so much that everything almost felt rushed.
It did. It would have been, I agree, much more interesting to see them sit with that gentleman's club for another season, because then we would have cared more when they do get that title and have to give up the gentleman's club so they can properly fit into society.
Yeah, and he was too much of a side character thrown into being a main character.
Yeah. Every time we went to them, I was like, I have no reason to care about them. And it sucked because their story on its surface was interesting. Honestly, that could have been a spin-off series to see this family come from 0 to 100.
Yeah.
We got what we got. Let's hope Benedict's season is good. Okay, we've talked about it. We've discussed our characters. We've had a great time. I've had a good time. Have you had a good time?
I have had a great time.
Well, hope everyone listening has enjoyed our little talk about Bridgerton. If you'd like to come and join the conversation, you can leave comments on our social medias. Right now we got an Instagram at Unpacking the Plot Pod. We also have our YouTube where you can also listen to the podcasts and comment on them. And you can listen to Unpacking the Plot at pretty much most places where you can listen to podcasts. We really encourage, listening and the feedback. Please share all that jazz. Like and subscribe. I don't know.
We also have a Facebook.
Yes, we do.
Let us know what you're interested in having us cover next.
Yes.
Next episode should be The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue.
Yeah, that was a really big book that was really popular during the pandemic, so I'm excited to finally read it. I love V.E. Schwab.
This is my first book I've read of hers, and I'm excited to finish it.
That pretty much concludes today's episode. I am Isa.
And I am Ava.
And
thank you for unpacking the plot with us.
Yeah, thank you for unpacking the plot with us.
Unbridging the Ton, if you will.
Unbridging the Ton. Bye.